All I wanted to do was to paint sunlight on the side of a house. He summed up a lifetime of effort in a single sentence. Edward Hopper, literally at 6'5", a towering figure of 20th century art in America. Those few words defined this taciturn man. It was light he loved best. The Hodgkins house in Gloucester. A woman in a bedroom. New York's 7th Avenue on an early Sunday morning. Just some of the images in Edward Hopper, a new show at Boston's Museum of Fine Arts. One bathed in sunlight, moonlight, and neon. It highlights his work from 1925 to 1950. It includes 100 paintings, watercolors, and prints, as well as 2 5-and-dime ledger books, complete with his sketches, notes, and prices. Carol Troyan is curator of the Boston exhibition. What is the, if you can describe it, the magic that makes his painting of the mundane, of the corner drugstore, diner, lighthouse, an ordinary New England house? What does he do that gives it this other meaning?
I have to throw it right back at you with something that Hopper said, which is, if you could say it in words, you wouldn't need to paint it.
Edward Hopper was born in 1882 in Nyack, New York, then a small, prosperous town on the Hudson River. He studied at the New York School of Art and in 1906 made the first of 3 trips to Paris. He sold little and rarely showed his work. To make ends meet, he worked as a commercial artist and produced hundreds of paintings and prints, like this one. He called it Night Shadows.
It's an everyday scene. You might look out your window and see this 5 times a night, but somehow by emptying out all the detail, Hopper makes it uncanny.
There's something beyond the superb craftsmanship. I mean, it reeks of something else. I mean, of what I suppose covers virtually all of his paintings, and it's a kind of loneliness or solitariness.
I prefer solitariness, and Hopper would too. Hopper had a very rich interior life. He enjoyed his own company. I don't mean he was a snob. I mean he enjoyed being solitary, and he often includes pictures of people by themselves, people alone, but not necessarily lonely.
Hopper lived in New York's Greenwich Village, but spent his summers on the Maine coast. He painted lighthouses as if they were monuments. In Truro on Cape Cod, he celebrated the most humble houses and inns. But it was in the fishing town of Gloucester, Massachusetts, with its grand sea captains' houses and modest cottages, where he made his mark with this, the mansard roof. When the Brooklyn Museum bought it in 1923 for $100, his career was launched. Clearly, he got great pleasure out of these houses.
And we do through his eyes, but when he painted them, this was unbelievably unfashionable. This was the skyscraper era. I suspect that Hopper, who was something of a contrarian, liked them, in part because I suspect he knew that they were the kinds of buildings that people simply walked by, didn't pay much attention to, but also because they have all of these projecting porches and overhangs and ornament that cast interesting shadows.
Hopper loved rustic New England, but New York City was the landscape he loved most. The brownstones and bridges, the city's cast of characters, a shopkeeper sitting on a sidewalk, ladies at lunch, a woman in the automat, a night out at the theater, and an evening in.
This is a man who's just come home from work. He's taken his suit jacket off, and she's in an evening dress. And clearly there has been, or will be, or might be, some disagreement about how they're going to spend the rest of the evening. In the related picture, here's a woman seated in a rocking chair.
With nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go. Is she reading? Does she have a cat on her lap? To me, this is a picture.
Or just being nosy.
Or just watching the world go by. But this is a picture, in my imagination anyway, of serenity, every bit as much as that is a picture of discontent.
Hopper also loved painting women, or this woman. His wife, Josephine Nivison, an artist he married in 1924, and was virtually his only model. She appears over and over again. This one is called New York Movie.
For my money, the best painting he ever did, if you yelled fire, this is the one I'd put under my arm. I think it's a picture that's all about fantasy. There's obviously the fantasy of the movie itself, and then contrasted with that, of course, is the real subject of the picture, the usherette, who is lost in her own fantasies, her own daydreams. And then you have the fact that there are only 2 or 3 people in the theater, which was a total lie. Hopper is painting this in 1939. People are going to the movies like crazy.
People like Hopper. He loved the movies. By the late 1930s, familiar scenes made their way into his work in paintings like this, Nighthawks. It is his most famous work and one of the most recognizable and reproduced paintings in American art. It could be Humphrey Bogart sitting at that bar, couldn't it?
In fact, it was, because in 1939, I think, is when The Big Sleep was made, and he starred as Chandler's famous detective Philip Marlowe.
I mean, this is his version of the city that never sleeps. That
Exactly.
it could be 4 in the morning. Right?
Well, it probably is. There is a certain consolation in the company of strangers. And is that what's going on here? And I'm sure there are 55,000 other explanations that could be applied, none of which really clings to the picture, and you're continually mystified and fascinated.
By the time Hopper painted Nighthawks in 1942, he was a huge success. He had major shows at the Museum of Modern Art and the Whitney Museum, and in 1956, he made the cover of Time magazine. He was at his full strength as an artist when abstract expressionism was all the rage in American art. Mm-hmm. And this is about as distant from abstract expressionism as you could imagine.
Yes.
What did he make of it?
Well, he himself was no fan of abstraction. In fact, there were newspaper and magazine articles, one after another, pairing him with Jackson Pollock as the 2 greatest American artists of the day.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so.
Hopper continued to paint in his later years, but produced little, only 1 or 2 pictures a year. Among them, Sun in an Empty Room, painted in 1963, 4 years before he died at the age of 85. You said you would get the usherette if there was somebody shouting fire. That's the one I would choose.
I have another arm. I take that under the other arm. Yeah.
In a certain way, it is all the painting he's done, because it's got its mystery and that sense of stillness that pervades everything he does.
Someone asked him when he was working on this picture what he was after in it, and I can just hear him in a tone of polite exasperation saying, "I'm after me."
And of course, the light, the purest thing in life and art.